Welcome back to the Satisfactory tutorial. This is going to be part 6 of the whole tutorial. In this part we're going to be going over the actual inventory system, let's say. We're going to be using an inventory system that I made in another video, so I'm going to be making that available down in the description. But if you want to know how it's made, you can always go and follow the tutorial and come back here. It's fine. It's not a problem. Or if you just want to simply copy it, that's also okay. Now, very quickly, before we actually get started with the main part of this tutorial, I wanted to make a quick fix to the actual container system. Currently, if we run this system here, now if we just make our storage visible just to showcase it, and save here, our current storage has, let's just remove the second one, has one item. It has, let's say, 5. If we let those items come out here, if we let them come out, there will only be 4. And so that's a bit of an issue that we need to fix because there are 5 and it should output 5. So the reason for that is inside of our, I believe, container. So the problem is currently in the container itself, when we output an item, we go through here and we try to output an item like this. And so the problem with this is we're going through a loop, modifying the actual value, and then we're telling it what to do to remove. So what's happening is it's getting removed to 0, and then it's actually getting removed immediately when it should be spawning one first. So to change this, very simply, we just want to remove this from here and place it here. That way the modification only happens once we're done. So we can just promote this to a variable here, call it key. There we go, and we'll just plug in the key here to all the other things. It'll be much easier to read. The key can go down here as well. It'll obviously go here as well for the add, and then for the calculation we simply want to do a copy of this and just plug this in here. And now normally if we do it this way, we will now no longer have an issue with only spawning 4 out of the 5. So let's go and test that. So plug that in here, and now we should have 5 coming out. So that's 2, 3, 4, and 5. And no 6th, because there's only 5. So good. So it's working. Now, one other issue we have is we need to duplicate this to showcase it. This currently has 0. If this one has 0 in it, and we do this right here, we drag out so that it spawns more, and we connect this, it's going to input just fine, but it's not actually going to output, even though now it has items, so it should output. So to do that, we need to add one little bit of detail in the buildings here. In the start outputting function, I believe, in the start inputting function, so in input from attach point, I believe right here, right after this, we can call start outputting. And with that, we can now say, if we do play, as long as there is an output possible, if an input just comes in, it will check if it can actually output it. So let's see. And now, as you can see, the items are indeed going out, and normally there should only be 5 as well. And we do indeed just have 5. So that fixes that little issue, and now we can get into the actual thing. So what we'll be doing here is we're going to be adding that inventory to the game, or to this project more like, which will just give us a basic inventory that does everything you can think about, and we're going to be applying that to the crafting system here. So with, well, exactly what you can imagine from Satisfactory, right? So let's get into it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import the actual inventory system. So to do that, there's a link down below which will give you the actual inventory, and the files that are in it are for the actual content file. So it's not a project, it is specifically the files, the U assets, etc. So to get them into this project right here, we need to open its source files. So you can do this either by opening here in your content browser and right-clicking and looking for Show in Explorer. And once that's open, you'll be greeted. You want to go to the content file. And in the content file, you simply want to get the folder called inventory and drop it inside of here. So that'll appear here, and it might not appear immediately right here, or it does. If not, you just need to reload the page and that'll work just fine. So your inventory might look a bit different because I'm actually giving you the final version, because otherwise the tutorial would be an hour longer just to convert the old one to the new one. And that took a lot of time, so I'm just going to be cutting that and just giving you guys the final version. So I'll see you then. It will also require some minor changes to other functions, so we're going to go through those one by one. I'll add a quick title so that you know where it is. So we never set up anything for the inventory, so we need to do that, and that is just simply setting up an image, which we're going to set as 2D texture, and we're looking for this one right here. If we compile and save, we want to add item type, and that's going to be of type is e_item type. Compile and save. Our items don't actually store anything like this, so we need to store a structure in them because we didn't do that last time. We just assumed the items would be one unit, and that's because I didn't plan originally in making an inventory, and because on the production line there would only ever be one item in one spot, we didn't bother with quantity. So we're going to make modifications to that by simply saying structure, and this is going to be of type st inventory. And that's pretty much how we're going to use it for the inventory. So one thing we can do, and this will cause a few issues, I believe, but it shouldn't be too bad. What we're going to do is we're going to modify our item so that it no longer uses the data asset, but simply uses our structure here. So we're going to look for all the gets for this, and we're going to break our structure and use the item data instead. So we can't just do this because there's obviously more outside. So we need to make sure that we get all of these and modify them. So this will bring us to A buildings. And instead we're going to get structure. We're going to split, and we're going to plug that in right here. So we can line this up. Next one, we can just we can just copy this. It'll be just as fast. Plug it in here. And now we're actually using the same structure, so we don't have any issues here. And that will do it. Now we should no longer have, if we delete this, there shouldn't be any issues because it notices that there's nothing there. Now we can close buildings, I believe. I don't know why we have this one here. We can get rid of that as well while we're at it. Okay, so there's an issue here because we no longer have our data structure, because this is what determines what data structure it is, or what data asset it is, sorry, not structure. So to get that, instead what we do is we go into here and we make sure that our structure is exposed on spawn. We can compile it, and back in our buildings, if we refresh this node, it'll appear right here. Now what we want is we want it to be of the data item here that we chose, but we want to make sure that we set quantity to 1. And actually, to be fair, it's probably better that if we go into items and we set its default value to 1, because there will be at least 1 in quantity every time. So now we should be able to close our buildings. We should be able to close our items. So in our A item again, sorry, I shouldn't have closed that. We want to make a function called modify quantity. And it's going to be of type, it's going to take in new quantity very simply. Quantity, not in all caps. And it's going to be an integer. And simply get a reference to our structure, set members, and plug in the quantity into here. Now there we go. Let's line this up. There we go. Compile. And what we need is we need the player character, because that's where it's initiated, if I'm correct. Yeah, so we have our pickup item here. And if I'm correct, if we go and place an item like this, place it here. If we give it no conveyor belt, we just tell its structure to be of type iron ore. And we go and pick it up. I can't remember what key we use, so I'm going to have to try and figure that out in a second. I think it's in our event graph, yeah. So interact. What key do we use for interact? So it should be in our inputs. So interact is E. So that should be doing a line trace. Let's just see if it's visible. So indeed, so we are hitting it. It just doesn't do anything. So that's kind of a problem. So we want it to actually do something, so we can hide the line trace. We don't need it. In our event graph, if we press E, this should be getting called print. Let's see. Yeah, so we are indeed calling the print. And we are hitting something. And so currently we only have the interact. Then in that case, what we want to do to make this interact work, well, we need to tell the item that it can interact. So we have it right here. So normally, if we're hitting the item, we're saying pick up. So what that does is it will tell the conveyor, but the problem is currently we have no conveyor because we've told it to not have a valid conveyor. So to fix that, we need to make a few modifications. Now, one thing I did want to do, which I did in my project, is I made some modifications to the interact. And so we're going to make that quick change right now. We're going to need two types of interactions. One, which is this one, interact with actor. And it doesn't actually need a return. So we're going to get rid of that. But we're going to add a reference to the player. So this is player ref, we'll call it, and it's of type FPS underscore satisfactory. And this will normally not cause any issues here because it doesn't mind. It'll just have something here. There we go with the return. But we're going to be changing that in a second because we don't actually want it to function this way. So how we want it to function is we want to have a sequence here instead. Instead of simply calling it false here, we want to try something else. So the first sequence will go here. If we succeed in getting in, did I change the typing here? Yeah, I did. So we don't need this anymore. We'll come back to it. Actually, you know what, instead, we also want to have a second function, but actually we'll do that later because that's more for aesthetics, so it's not that important. So for our item, we want to add a simple cast here for our player character, which we already have. So what we'll do is we're going to get our AC inventory, from our player ref here, we're going to get AC inventory. And what we'll tell it is to pick up item. And the item that it's going to pick up is going to be, well, self. So we can call self here, and that'll add the item to the inventory. If this succeeds, so for those who didn't follow the tutorial, the return value doesn't mean that we actually managed to pick up an item. What it means is that we actually finished the stack. So let's say you pick up one item at a time, well, it's always going to finish the stack because there's nothing left. So it will be true. So if it's true, then we simply want to say destroy actor. That means that there's nothing left and we can get rid of it. So we can put we don't need a return node here. We also want to make sure we get rid of this because if the conveyor belt isn't valid, we just want to go here. So we get rid of the return here as the return finishes the function. And I think we actually don't need this anymore because we're doing this instead. So we can get rid of that. And that should do it because we no longer need now the old one that we had. We just use this one instead. So now if we check, currently we have nothing in inventory. If we press E, it should pick it up. So, okay, so we're getting an error. So that means at least it's doing what it should. So what is the error? Okay, sorry. So that's my bad. In the player, we have a player ref, but we haven't set that. So it doesn't know what to reference to for the inventory. So if we press E, there we go. And we have our item right here. Now, it's not showing anything because we haven't told it what to look like. And if the inventory works correctly, we can move things around. And it saves between, well, tabbing in and out. So it's working as intended. The only problem is, well, we haven't set up visual. So let's go ahead and do that. Normally there should be a file with some images as well alongside in the description. And those images, I'd like to point out very clearly, are from the game Satisfactory itself. So make sure you don't use these in any commercial projects because, well, that's not allowed, not legal. So be careful with these. They're specifically for me showing you how to do it in the video. You don't have to use them if you don't want to. I'm just doing it for educational purposes, let's say. So inside of our blueprint, outside our blueprints, actually, we have our asset folder, and we're going to put them in a folder we'll call icons. So just open that up, drag the 5 of them in. Normally it should be for, well, once it opens, it should be for coal, iron ingot, iron ore, steel beam, and steel ingot. So that's so that we can test. The reason I chose these 5, we could have added more, is so that we can test one getting converted iron ore to iron ingot, but we can also test these 2 merging into a steel beam with a recipe. And obviously the same for steel ingot and then into steel beam. So with that, we should be done for the basics of picking up now. So if we pick that up, it works. The only problem is, yeah, we have no visuals, so let's try and set it up in a second. So while we're at it, we'll also make the new assets or the new items. So inside of our crafting, no, not our crafting, sorry, our items, we have iron ore, we have iron ingot. So let's change those icons because they have none currently. And we'll call it iron ingots. That's what it is. We have a max stack of 100. We can leave that. The next one, iron ore, has its correct name, iron ore. And normally if we just do that, we should be able to now pick this up and have an actual icon. There we go. So it does appear. So they're working as intended. Let's go ahead and make the other ones. So this will be coal. And let's just go ahead and rename that one as well. So coal. We don't have a static mesh for it, but that doesn't matter. For now, we want to call it coal as well. Max stack of 100. We can duplicate iron ingots and call it steel ingot. Steel ingots, and just remove the 1 at the end. Steel this time, and make sure you choose the ingot. Rename it to steel ingot as well, otherwise the name will be incorrect once we start setting the next part up. And finally the last one, which is steel beam. Open that up, and well, we'll change that to steel beam. Same thing for the name. There we go. So that does it normally for all of them. Now we can actually change the data asset to see if it's working. Now it's a steel beam. Pick that up. Yeah, it is. It's working correctly. We can do the same for any of the other ones. If we change the value to something like 80, see if that works. If we pick it up, we have 80 indeed. We can split them. We can double click to join them. And it's all working fine. So one little thing we can do before getting into the crafting itself is something that we probably should have done maybe before, but I didn't get around to it, so let's do it now. Is it's associated with the interaction. We want to know what we're interacting with. So to do that, we want to have a widget. So we can finally get into our widgets, make a folder, and create UMG, or in user interface, widget blueprints. So we want to select the default one, call it UMG, and this will be interact, we'll call it. Now go ahead and open it up. And this one is going to be rather simple. We want to have a scale box, and we want to make sure we set the scale box to, actually no, we don't need a scale box. I think a canvas panel will be enough for this. So we want a canvas panel, and we're going to add a second canvas panel in it. And this canvas panel right here will go anchored to the bottom. Make sure its alignment is 0.5 and 1 so that it appears above if we put it in 0, 0. We want it to be minus 50 or so, maybe a bit more, minus 100 probably better. We want it to be, let me check, 500 long by 40. Now, if these are my values, obviously every time it's what I put. If you want to have something slightly different, usually in values, this won't matter too much. So set this anchor to fill, 0, 0. This is just kind of a background so that it's visible that we're on something else. Want it to be 0.4, and we're going to make it black. And then what we want is we want a vertical box, which we're also going to attach to the canvas panel, and we want it to be filled as well. And finally, one last thing, which is going to be the actual text itself. So grab the text here, place it in the vertical box, and we want to change its font to Roboto Light, just a bit smaller. We want to center it, make sure it's fill except for the vertical, which we want to center, and select fill here as well. Now what this is, it's very simple. It's just going to be when we hover over an item, we want to know what that is. And it's going to be the same for the buildings. It's going to be the same for everything that we can interact with. So just to give an idea, we'll put this as press F to interact, or in our case, I think it is E. So press E to interact. There we go. So obviously this won't work because we need to update it. So to update it, we first need to make sure our text box here is an actual variable. So we'll call this text box, well, let's just say overlap is variable. And inside of here, we want to call a function. We'll say set interact text, and it's going to take in very simply. Well, actually, let's move that a bit to the side. A variable we'll call name of interact, and this is name, but it's also kind of action at the same time, because what we're going to do is we will get our text box overlap. We will say set text, and we're going to format it so that what it does is it will say press E to perform action. So format right here. We want to say press E, like what we did in the other place, and then to, and make sure you use these specific brackets. I can't remember what they're called. And then we'll call it action. And simply plug in the name of interact to the action. And what this will do is whenever we call this function, it will set it to this plus whatever we input. And with that, we are done. We also have this being variable, but we don't need that, so disconnect that. And we're done with our UMG interact. Don't need it anymore. Now we'll just set it up so that the interaction works visually. So this was the whole purpose of the second function I was talking about earlier in the actual BPI for interact, is we're going to have a function called overlap interaction. And what this does is it takes in an input of type, well, we'll call it HUD, even though it's not properly what it is. It is the UMG that we just made, interact, compile. And what this does is inside of here, when we overlap our overlap interaction here, this will create itself in the event graph, so be careful. What we simply have to do here is we just have to say set interact text. And interact text here would be, well, we want to get the item. We want to get our structure here. We want to break or split, sorry. And then here we want to say get name. So it will be press F or press E2, and we want to say pick up this. So we want to say format text again, and we will say pick up, and then we'll use the same brackets, item, and plug the name into here. Now we just need to tell our player how to treat this situation. So to do that, we're actually going to have to use the event tick this time, because there's no real way around it. We want to be checking all the time. So in our FPS Satisfactory, we want to get our event tick. And in the event tick, we'll use our function we made here for line trace for camera, plug it in here. If we hit something, is where most of the stuff is going to happen. We want to break our hit. And what we want to do is from our hit component, or no, our hit actor, we want to say does implement interface. The interface being BPI interact. And then we can just collapse this because all we need is the actor itself. We don't need anything else. So we're going to reroute on false here, because if we hit nothing, we want to make sure that we hide our HUD or our widget for this. So, but at the same time, if we hit something that does not implement the interface, we also don't want to do it. So we're going to reroute here as well, connect these two up, and we're going to need a reference to our UMG. Now in a second, we're just going to do that. Actually, sorry, no. Let me just double check. Yeah. So first, what we actually want to do is we want to create our widget here in the first place. So we're going to say create widget, and that widget is going to be UMG underscore interact. And we're going to promote this to a variable, which we will call UMG interact. And we're not going to add it to viewport because once we spawn, we're not specifically looking at an item, so we don't want that. What we want to do is if ever we have our tick and it hits something, then we want to act upon this variable. So that'll be here. So right here, we want to reroute this. Not that, we want to reroute. And with the reroute, what we want to check is we want to check whether it is equal to the previous one, because we don't want to be showing it and calling it every time we overlap something, because otherwise you might be overlapping twice the same item. So to do that, we need to actually promote this to a variable. We're going to go and promote this and say this is previously overlapped actor. And we're not going to set it here, but what we're going to do here is check that this is different. And if it is different from our previously, then we can set it again and actually perform our, well, our overlap actor. So from this, we want to call overlap interaction message. And the HUD is our UMG interact right here. Plug this in. Now to reroute here just so that it's more readable. And obviously, because of how this works, we can now set our previously overlapped to the new one that we're overlapping. And what we also want to do is, because of how this works, we need to make it visible. So set visibility right here. We want to make sure that it is, well, it doesn't matter. Visibility in this case is fine because we're never going to be clicking on it. So we don't have to worry about that. So here we actually do need to make it visible. I just realized we want to add to viewport, and we will immediately make it hidden because there's no item in front of us. So we won't do that. And so here, if this happens, that means we didn't hit anything. Obviously, if this happens here, that means that we're overlapping the same actor. So we don't want to actually hide anything because we're still looking at an interactable. So we'll just copy this, place it here, say hidden, go, and for previously overlapped actor, same thing. We want it now to be set to null because we're not hitting anything. So we compile and save. And normally, if we go and look at an item, we have E to pick up call. If we go here, we have E to pick up call as well. Oh, and the reason for that is just because we're not resetting the value every time we hover something new. Well, actually, we do reset it. It's just that in this case, it's not getting set to empty because we don't have anything calling that function inside of our building. It's the same thing here. But if we go to this, it'll work. If, for instance, we have a second item here and we set it to be iron ore, we'll see the swap works just fine. Iron ore, coal, iron ore, coal. So it works just fine there. So with that, we have our interaction. We have our scanning items. We know what we're going to interact with. Next, we have the crafting. So the actual crafting table. Before making the crafting table, we actually need to have a crafting table. So to have a crafting table, we need an asset. So I'm going to put it in buildings. You can put it there as well, I'd suggest, and import that in. It will also be in the description. Obviously, it doesn't look very pretty, but doesn't really matter. We're looking for functionality here. And so this is what we have. So now what we need is we need to make our building for our crafting bench. So we're not going to base it on the actual builds like this because these buildings have the functionality for inputs and outputs, and we don't need that. We just need something that is placed and that we can interact with. So right click on a builds, create child, and we want to call it a builds underscore crafts. And craft will do because there's only going to be one of these. Double click to open it, pull it up right here. And also we don't need any of these anymore. Well, item we definitely don't need, player we don't need, and BPI interact definitely not. In our craft, we need very few things. All we need first is a static mesh because we need to know what we're looking at. So select our crafting bench. And with that, we have finished visually what we need. Variable wise, we only need a reference to the player. So call it interacting player. Player. It's going to be of type FPS underscore satisfactory, obviously. And the other thing we need is a reference to the widget for the crafting, but we don't have that yet, so we'll get to there in a second. And one last thing we need is also we need to be able to interact. So to interact, we go to class settings. We add our BPI interact. And inside of here, just to test if things are working correctly, we only need the event begin play. We can search for event, I think it is overlap interaction. No, not that one. We want overlap interaction. We'll just call it from here. So double click it because we don't have it yet. And we want to say set interact text. And the text this time is going to be open crafting table. So let's compile and save. if we go and now add our crafting table right here, if we go up to it, we get open crafting table. Here we still have iron ore and open crafting table. So the first thing we can do is we're going to make the widget for the crafting. So we'll start by doing that, and then we'll set everything up to spawn it, and then we will close the builds craft because we won't need any more. So the basic user widget, UMG crafting table, we'll call it. And inside of it, we need one thing, and that is we need a reference to our inventory. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to create a variable for that, and this is going to be called or we'll just call it AC inventory. We'll do just fine. AC inventory right here. Object reference. Make sure it is exposed on spawn. Let's drag this a bit to the side. Compile and save. And inside of our craft here, we now need to do the other interactions. So event, interact with actor right here. We can then set our interaction player like this. And we can now create our widget. So this is as UMG crafting, or crafting table, sorry. There we go. It's of type UMG crafting. And what we'll do is check first if it's valid. Now, to be fair, this isn't actually necessary because normally we can't interact while crafting, obviously. So what we'll do is we will say still is not valid. We'll say create widget. We'll just do it how we usually do it. It's better this way. UMG crafting table. And we have our AC here. So now that we know what our interacting player is, we can get our AC inventory. So we don't need the owner, we just need the AC inventory. Plug it into here and we close this. Actually, I forgot something. In our crafting table, we need to make one last thing. We need an event dispatcher, which will be called close widget. Oh, close widget, not tr. And back in here, we'll be able to bind that. So first we want to set our widget to its variable right here. Then we want to bind its event. So close widget. We're going to actually create a custom event for this. So create matching event. And this is going to be called close widget. Close widget like that. I'm just going to place it here because it's going to act as the isValid pretty much. So plug it in right there. Then we can say add to viewport. Here, plug it in. And the last thing we want to do is we want to get player controller. And we're going to tell it to set input mode to game and UI. And what we'll do here is we will say show mouse cursor to true, because you want to be able to see our mouse when we interact with this. Reroute here. And one last thing we're going to do is, once again with a reference to our player this time, we want to call disable movement. And now we'll get a reference to our character movement. And this is pretty much what's going to allow us to press, for instance, tab and other keybinds whilst being in the widget without moving, because otherwise that'd be a bit annoying. So to solve this, the opposite of disable movement, and this is a bit strange, but it is called set movement mode. And we want to make sure we set it to walking, because what this does is it sets it to 0 or to none, which means you can't move. So on the other side, what we need to do, and this is something that I wasn't aware of until very recently, and you should probably do this in the other projects if you have the time or want to actually do it. It isn't very bad, but when we close the widget, usually what we would simply do is we would say, well, we just cleared the widget, we remove it from parent, right? And we set this to false. But when you bind events, it's better to take those actual events. So we need a reference to our crafting table here, and we want to say unbind event from close widget. And in our case, we can use unbind all, but for the sake of just showing how it works, we'll say unbind event specifically. And the event we're going to be unbinding is our close widget, because that's the event that is associated with it. So then we can then set this to false because we no longer need it. And what we'll do is we'll be calling this from inside of here, meaning that's what we'll do remove from parent, so we don't need to worry about that. So Yep, that should do. So this, I'm not sure if this might cause an error because I'm kind of winging this because I forgot to do it on my project. But we'll try. If it causes an error, then that should mean it's fine because we're actually deleting the widget. So unbinding the event shouldn't be necessary because the widget doesn't exist anymore. But for safety, we'll try this just to see. So next we want to do the reverse of this. So we want to get our controller again. We want to say set input mode to game only. Let's plug it there. And we then want to say show mouse cursor set. Plug it in here. Reroute these. And as we said, plug this in here so that we can reset our movement after we're done. So let's go there, compile and save. This should do the trick. Not if we forget to take that, otherwise we won't see the mouse. And normally, if I'm correct, if we go into here, what we can do so that we can test if this is working, what we'll do first is we will go into here, we'll add a canvas panel, and we'll just add an image that we'll just put in the middle for now. We'll just center it. That way we can test if it's actually working. And to be able to close it, what we'll do is we will call IA underscore inventory. So this is tab. And we'll use that to actually say close widget. So we can call this from here, close widget right here on started, I think we'll use. And when we call it, we then want to remove from parent. So call that right there. Upon spawning, we need to tell this to be the focus. Because if we don't tell it to focus this widget, it won't understand and will consider that it's still focusing the game and still trigger inputs from the player character. So we need to say set focus keyboard. And for this to work, we need to make sure that in our designer here, when we select our crafting table, so I think this is the same as using this, but it's easier to read in here. We want to make sure that we go down and make sure that is focusable is true. If it's not true, you'll get some warnings and it won't work. So now, if we interact and press tab. Okay, so in the end, I don't think we're going to go with using the tab here. To close it, we'll just use a simple button to do that. It's much easier and less of a nuisance to work with. So we're just going to get rid of all the stuff we just made, those quick changes. Just plug this back into the started and compile. And now we can close that. And we don't need our crafting anymore. We can delete that. In our AC inventory, we can delete the allow duplicates, not necessary, not duplicates, sorry. The inventory locked. And it apparently is still referenced somewhere. Apparently it's still referenced. I think it's in, oh yeah, right here, sorry. My bad, let's just get rid of that. Compile and save, we can now get rid of that, don't need it. And we can close the inventory, and now we can get to the actual crafting itself. So, the crafting we're gonna need quite a few things, as in the actual widget itself. So let's get started with that. We'll start with the canvas panel, and we want to use this one as a center. This is gonna be the global thing. So set it to anchor in the middle, put it to 0, 0, and we put the alignment of 0.5, just that it's properly centered. Then we want to start off by having a image, which we'll be using as the background for it. And this is going to be filled, and it's going to be black, and we're going to make it quite light. We don't want it to be very visible, maybe even 0.2. And sorry, the size for the canvas panel, before I forget, because it's kind of important, we want it to be 1100 by 700, so quite big. So what we want in here is we're going to be adding 3 different columns. So let's add those. So those are going to be canvas panels themselves, and actually 4. The first one is going to be just very basic. It's going to be a fill on the top, and it's going to be 0 right. And I think I made it 400, 40 if I'm correct, yeah. So 40, and this is gonna be very simple. Image goes in, it will be fill as well. Make sure you use the whole thing. We'll make it a gray, not too dark, but a basic gray. Add some text, and this text will simply be just to say that it is the crafting bench, just so that we know what we're working on. Crafting bench. There we go. And we can put this to regular. We can also just size this to content, and we want it to be a bit offset, so put it like 15. No, so it's not right on the edge. Then we can add our first box. So this first box is going to be the recipes. So we want a canvas panel, and we'll go through making these one by one. So right here, we're going to do the recipe system. So for the canvas panel, we want the crafting, well, actually, we'll call this title. And we'll call the second one recipes. Now in recipes, we want to first go down by 40. And we want it to be, if I'm correct, we want it to be 320 on the X and 660 on the Y, because that's how long it is to reach the end. Now inside of this, we're going to add two things first, or three to be fair. We're going to add a search bar. So that's going to be a text, and we're looking for text box. Inside of here, it's going to be at the top. It's going to be fill on the top and 0, and we'll put 40. Inside of it, the text by default is pretty good. We can just test by saying search for recipe, three dots. And it's not very visible, but it's fine. It'll work just okay for this. I think we can make it a bit, yeah, if we make it a bit darker here, it becomes more visible. Under that, we want to add a check box, because we want to know whether we can only show the buildable items. So we want this to be, I think 50 by 50 will do. Sorry, not that, 50 by 50 like this. And we want it to be, well, 40, because the search bar is 40. And then we'll just add a text next to it. Or can we add it on it? Yeah, we can add it on it. And that text is going to be simply saying only show affordable recipes. It's going to be a bit too big, so we just make sure this is light, and we'll put it down to something like 16. I'll do the trick. And that should be good. So we can leave it like this. Nothing else will change anyway. So there we go. I don't think we can add an offset here. It would look nicer, but we'll just have to go with this. It's not perfect, but it will work just fine. And now if we play, we have our actual... There we go. So for some reason it doesn't work if we don't click on the actual icon, which makes this whole thing useless. So we're just going to actually separate this and just put it in the recipes themselves. Make it 40. Put it down, oh, sorry, by 40 as well. And we'll just move it like this. And what we can do here, just to make this a bit cleaner, we can make this a bit bigger because it's hard to see. We'll put it to 1.6, 1.6, 1.6, not 0.16. It's pretty bad. And there we go. We'll just move this down as well and set it to fill size to content. There we go. And the final thing we need is a scroll box, and that is going to be where all the recipes are going to be shown. So this goes to, I think, about 60, no, 80 will do, I think, maybe 90 to be fair. And we want it to be fill on the top as well, I think. Is that what I put it like? Yeah, so we fill also on the top. So 0 on the right, and we want to go all the way down, and I'm not sure what the value is because it's different from mine. And so we'll be putting it to 570, and that's full. So what we'll be adding here now is the recipes themselves. So let's go and make a widget for that. Right here, right click, UMG, and this is going to be use a widget, UMG, and this is, we'll call it recipe, very simply. Double click to open it, and once again, start with a canvas, right here. And in the canvas, we want to actually set our size so that we can see what it's going to look like. We want to put it to custom, and we want it to be 320 by 60. That's the size that we're going to be using. And the first thing we want is an image. We need to know what item it is that we're trying to craft. So this is going to be, I think we can just put it, let me see. So yeah, so for the icon, we want it to be in 5 here, and we want it to be 50 by 60. I think that's right, or did I get it wrong? No, 60 by 60, sorry. And for now, just to see if it works, we'll put an iron ingot as an icon, and that's what it'll look like. Now we're going to need 2 other images, and that are going to act kind of as a background and a hover for this. So the first one will be fill, well, both of them will be fill either way. The first one we're going to use a kind of orange, so from pretty much from the game, we'll just select something like this right here. Actually, maybe a bit darker will work a bit better. There we go. So this is going to be orange. This can be hidden by default. We don't need to actually see it. And for the next one, so this will be, we'll just rename it to image background. And it does need to be variable because we need to modify it. We can make a duplicate of it, and this is going to be image hover. An image hover itself is just going to be a black image. Nothing to worry about there. And it, on the other hand, is going to be 0 on the render and visible. And we'll also just take the time to rename our image here to image item, we'll call it. So compile and save. And, oh, actually, maybe icon will be better. Icon is probably better here. Next, we need a horizontal box. And that's going to go to the canvas panel. And we want it to be on the edge of the item itself. So because the item is at 60 or 65, we put this at 65 as well. And actually, to be fair, we will probably put it at a bit more than that. We'll put it at 70 so that there's 5 off on each side. Now we want this to be fill. So we're going to put this to to 70 here. Make sure you leave it at 70, and we're going to actually move this to the side. Actually, forget what I just said. Just put it fill, leave that at 70. Then we want to add text. Actually, no, first we want to add a scale box. And the reason we want to add a scale box here is because we need to tell the text how to react based on, well, the amount of space it has. So then we want to add the text under the scale box. And we want to make sure the scale box is set to fill, but we want it to be centered here on the height, but fill here. And this text box is going to be the actual item name. So make sure it's variable as well, because we're going to need to set that up. And 2 more things we need. One is going to be the quantity, so another text, and this text is going to go inside of the box as well. And if I'm correct, this one is the left one. Yeah, so this one, the quantity is going to be much smaller, and we want to leave it to auto this time. And we want to put 5 on the right, because I'm going to get a bit of offset, not 0.55. And we want it to be to the right aligned. We want it to be centered, so the text is centered. But we want it to be something like 16. And we're going to set it to its text itself, just to test to, we'll say 999, because that's, we'll say the max that we can craft. Want it to be justified to the right, and make sure it is light as well, so we can see the difference between the two. This one we'll put to regular. Let's just see. There we go. Yeah. So we'll leave. We can also put that one at light, but this is fine as well. So we'll just rename it to iron ingot as well, so that it makes sense with the image. And also, sorry, I forgot, we want to justify this to the left and make sure this is fill. Otherwise it won't line up like this. And now normally, if I'm correct, the last thing we need to do for the text here is we want to make sure we auto wrap it. And what this means is if this text gets any longer, it'll start getting smaller so that it actually fits in the widget itself. So it's not perfect. Sometimes it does go a bit out, but in most cases it should work just fine. And so the last one, sorry, that I completely forgot. First, text box needs to be a variable. So make sure it's variable. And finally, we want a button, which is going to appear on top of everything. We need to make sure it appears on top of everything and not like a child here. We need it to be like that and below. And this will be button select. This just means that we select this function, that we select this recipe. So this is variable. We want it to be fill as well. So 0 and 0, but we want it to be invisible so we can click on it without being hit, or at least while still being able to see this. So to test if this is working, or visually at least, we can add a recipe here and a recipe here. Now normally nothing should be visible, like it shouldn't be orange. So if everything's correct, yeah, it's not visible, working just fine. We can click on our check mark, we can search, no problem, and now we can close this. So next up is the actual, well, the code, let's say. So for the code, we need to go into our graph. And there's a few things we need to do, but not that much, to be fair. So let's go through them one by one, because there's quite a few of widgets here that we need to remember. One, we need a variable to know if we're selected. So is selected, we will call it. We need another one to say can craft, if this item can be crafted, if there are enough resources. And then we want one for the actual recipe itself, which is a data asset called recipe that we already made last time for the automated crafting. So the only one we need to expose is this one, because we need to do it once we spawn the item at runtime, because that's how we're going to get our data assets. We also need an event dispatcher, which we'll call selected, which means we chose this item. And what does that mean? We need to know which item it is. So we will be adding a parameter called this, which is going to refer to this UMG itself, UMG recipe. And obviously to choose this, we're going to be simply calling in our event graph. If we click on the button, then it gets selected. To do all this, we're going to need the event construct only, and we're going to do kind of the overlapping and stuff like that first. So for the button, on clicked, we want on hover and on unhover. Now, on clicked, first we want a branch, because we want to check whether it is already selected. If it is selected, we don't do anything, because we don't want to do anything. If it isn't, it becomes selected, and we will be able to tell our background, so this one right here, to set its render opacity back to 0, because obviously to click on it, you need to be hovering it. On the other hand, we'll then be able to say that our... Sorry, no, I got that wrong. This becomes 1, because the background is the orange part, it becomes visible. And I don't think we need to set visibility to visible will work. And for the actual hover, we need to set opacity, or render opacity more like, to 0, because it is no longer visible. We don't want to make the orange any darker. Then we get to call our selected right here, and we put it to self. Now this is going to do nothing yet because we need to set it up in our crafting table. Then on select or hover, sorry, we do the same branch, because if it's selected, we don't want to do anything. We want to just leave it be when the item or the recipe is selected. So what we want is we want our hover. If it is hovering, we want it to be set to 0.4. And if we unhover, we want it to be set to, well, empty. So let's just align these up. There we go. Now we kept these in here, so let's see. If we go and hover over them, they're not unhovering. They're clicking, but... Okay, sorry, that's me. I completely forgot to set that back. Put it back to 0. If we click now, we hover, no problem, on and off. If we click, it gets hovered. That's not normal. Shouldn't be allowed to do that. Sorry, is selected needs to be set to true here, not false. So that should do all of it now. It should be working. If we click, we can no longer hover it. Now, obviously, right now, nothing happens. We can just click it once and then can't do it again. But we're going to tell it inside of here that if one is selected, the other one gets deselected, because you can only craft one item at a time. So with this, we have the visuals done. So let's move on now to, well, the last bit of the visuals, which is the event construct, where we're going to set our item based on the recipe that we have. So let's get our recipe. We want to get outputs. And from the outputs, we're only going to use the first one, because in the case of Satisfactory, at least, they only allow you to craft one item at a time, in the sense that if there is any secondary product made, we don't allow those to be crafted inside of the crafting table. So we're going to follow that same idea here, meaning we always get 0 as there can only be 1. So we want to get image here, and we're going to get our icon and say set brush from texture, and the texture is our image. Attach it right here. And next we want to get name, and this will go and be set text for our text box item name. So set text box, plug it in here and connect it all up. So now currently this won't work because our recipe is empty. So by default, let's put iron smelting, which isn't named correctly, but as you'll see, if we click right now, we don't actually get a change. Why is that? So let's just go and open that because it shouldn't look like that, at least. Okay, no, sorry. So that is right. It goes to iron ore and that works just fine. So next up is we're going to make some functions. So the most difficult one we'll leave for last. First, what we'll do is some extra ones that we'll need later. First, we want an easy way to get our inputs. And so for that, we'll just drag from here and we will say get inputs instead. And we will just return them right here because we can have multiple inputs. We only have one output, but multiple inputs. Want this to be a pure cast. Next, we're going to need something we're going to call get relevant items. Now, get relevant items is whole purpose is to tell the second or third part here that we're going to make which items are necessary for crafting and which ones can be made by crafting. And so to do that, we want to get our outputs from the recipe. Well, we want actually both, so we'll get our inputs with this. We'll first add our inputs. So inputs first in a for each loop, if it lets me attach it, there we go. And then we'll have another one, which will do it for the outputs. And what we want to get is we want to get the data item. So we're going to break this, the data asset, sorry. And we're going to create an array for this. So we're going to make a local variable we'll call L relevant data. And we're going to right click to convert it to an array, which we will then say add item right here. And we'll do the same thing. Do the same thing by copying that as well here. And then we can say return, and the return node is going to be the relevant data that we got right there. There we go. So that'll do it for this. Then we need one more function, which is the deselect recipe. So deselect recipe, and deselect recipe sets our isSelected to false, and we set our background, set visibility to hidden again. So make sure this is false, and that should be all our functions. Now we need a more complicated one, and this is going to be called update appearance. And what this does is it goes through which items are available in the inventory, how are they used for this item, how many can we craft with it, and is it craftable? And this is going to be called once we modify the inventory by crafting a new item or dropping something or anything like that. So for update appearance, what we need two inputs. First one being, well, actually no, we only need one, and that is the player or the AC inventory. So call that here. We want AC inventory. And with it, the first thing we want to get the inventory, because that's the main thing we're going to be using here. We're going to promote this to a we don't think we need to promote that. We want to get the values because we want to know what kind of items we have in there, how much there is of them. And we're then going to promote this to a variable. So this is L available items. So this is what we have. This is what the inventory can use. So then what we want is from our recipe, we want to get our inputs. And we're going to go through the inputs and kind of clear them out to say whether we have them or not. And so to do this, we want to break our inventory. We want to store quantity required, we're going to call it. Quantity required. Right here, plug it in. And then we're going to call here reroute and this is item required. So this is L item required. There we go. Plug this in. And the reason we have to do this is because normally you would expect to go through here and see if we have the inputs, but the problem with this is we can't check whether this contains an item, because to be valid here, it would have to be identical in the quantity and the item data, not just the item data, because that would make it very easy. So next what we need is another integer, which is going to be called quantity available. And now we're going to actually scan through here and check whether we actually have enough to perform what we need to do. So from our available items here, we're going to have another for each loop. Actually, I think I made a mistake here. This needs to be a for each loop with break, because we need to cancel out if we have the items required instead of keep looping through. And another thing, actually, we can also do it here as well. For each loop with break. And what we're going to do is we're going to get this and break it. And if ever our item data is double equal to our actual item required, then that means that we have that item available. So if we do, we can reroute and say, well, add this to our quantity available. So we'll say plus quantity available, set it here. And we'll actually just plug the bottom one in here because we want to add it to quantity available. And what we'll check for also is if ever this is superior or equal to our quantity required for this item specifically, then we can actually break out of this loop. And so if that happens, we will go and break here. So if this happens, we want to drag all the way back to the break. We're going to add a reroute node here just to make it more readable. Another one right here. And on completed, we're going to check whether it was a success or whether we finished, because break leads to the same completed. What we check is if quantity available is double equal to 0, means we found nothing, that the item was not available as I was going. And so then we're going to have this is if it failed. This means it didn't find anything, and the whole purpose of this is not to say that we didn't have enough quantity, but to say that the item cannot be crafted at all. So if this happens right here, sorry, no, this is wrong. This shouldn't be double equal. It's if ever quantity available ends up being inferior to the quantity required, then we're going to consider that we failed here. That the item cannot be crafted at all because we just scanned through the whole inventory to see if that item exists. So if that's the case, then we can just reroute here and actually break the previous one because, well, there's no point in keeping going because there is nothing to find because we'll never be able to craft this item anyway. So have this reroute be here as well. And we'll just continue down here. If, on the other hand, we have... So one other thing we need, which we haven't done yet, is we need to know how many we can craft because we have a text box that does exactly that. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to get our quantity available. We're going to divide it by our, what's it called? Our quantity required. And if this is superior, and so if this is inferior, so specifically we're looking for inferior here, to a new variable we're going to make, a local one, which we'll call quantity craftable, or maybe we'll, let's just say craftable instead. That way it's obvious that it's different. So if this is inferior to the craftable or craftable is equal to 0, then we can actually set our new craftable to be this value. And the reason we're doing inferior is because if the value is superior, it doesn't matter. If the lowest value is what we're going to be able to craft, it doesn't matter what other items are available to craft. We need to know what is the least. So we're going to set craftable to, well, our division here. And we plug it in right there. And finally, the last thing we do is once we've done this, we can do the output right here on the completed. So the first thing we want to check is if we can craft. And so for that, if it is failed, that means we can't craft. So we can check whether this is not true because it'll be easier to do it this way. If it did not fail, then that means that the crafting worked. And if the crafting worked, then we want to get our icon here, and we want to set its opacity to full. We want to make sure it's 100% visible because we'll be hiding it if we cannot craft it. Next, we want to set our text to the value that it can have. So we want to get our quantity right here, set text, plug it in here. And once again, we're going to use the format node here. And we're going to use craftable quantity. We're going to put for the format, we'll put brackets and then the smaller brackets for the value, so the quantity. Plug our craftable quantity in here, and this will give us the exact same text in the same format that we had before. Just move this to the side, line it all up. And the last thing we need to do is we need to check whether the item can actually be added to the inventory. And so that's the reason we need an actual reference to our inventory and not just the, or to the AC inventory here and not just this, is because we should have a function called in AC inventory for checking whether we can place the item. Okay, so we don't have that yet. So actually let's go ahead and make that. So what we want to do is inside of our actor inventory. So what we'll do here is we'll say place, pick up item, double click on it just so we can open it up a bit quicker. We're going to make a function where you're going to call is place for item, or more like maybe has place is probably a better way to write that. The item is going to be obviously the structure, so call it exactly that, structure, st inventory. And the first thing we can do is we can get our inventory. We can check if its length is superior. If what we want is if max size here is superior to inventory, then that means that we can automatically have this item. There's no problem. We can say return, and we want to return a boolean, and that's going to be true. So just call it return value, and that means that there's enough space to add the item because there's an entire empty slot, so we don't need to bother. Now, on the other hand, if there isn't, we want to get our structure, and we need to say, well, for the structure, we can split it. We have this much quantity we want to add, so we'll save that and say quantity in. And so quantity in gets plugged into false, and we're then going to do a while loop. So from here, we'll say while loop. While our quantity in is superior to 0, and then we're going to see if there's space to add it. Now, one other thing we do need is we need something else, which we're going to have called index, because otherwise this will be an infinite loop if it doesn't have any space. So we say if index is inferior, while index is inferior to max size, or, not or, we want and, as long as these two are both true, then we can do the while loop. If one of them fails, meaning that this becomes inferior to 0 or equals 0, then we stop. Or if we reach the max size of the inventory and we didn't find enough space. So for the return here, to determine whether it's true or false, we simply check whether our quantity in is superior to 0. If it is, if quantity is inferior or equal, to 0, then that means there's enough space. If not, it'll return false. So from our inventory, we're going to get the keys, and we're going to check through the indexes whether we have the space. So we're going to find our index here. And with the index, we're then going to say find an item. Here we're going to actually say get, not find, sorry. That's my bad. So get a copy, plug in the index, connect it to the find, and then we can split this. Now, if our item is double equal to our structure here, or our data asset in the structure, sorry, then that means we can check to see if there's enough space in that specific index. So for that, we can promote this to something we'll call current quantity, plug it into true, and we'll just put a reroute to make it a bit easier to read. There we go. Just line these up. There we go. And so what this means is our quantity in. So here from our data asset, we want to get max stack. And we want to check how much space there is left. So we're going to say max stack minus our quantity is how much space is remaining. So if there was 60 and we have 30 currently, then there's 30 left. If there's 60 and we have 50, then there's only 10 left. So 60 minus the 50. And that is what we have left. So we're going to say quantity in minus this is going to be set to our new quantity in. Attach it up here. And to be fair, we don't actually need this to be a variable. We can just simply put it like this. Plug this in there. I can delete our current quantity. It's not necessary. And so that will do the trick for checking whether we can fit an item or not. Now we can, I think we did this earlier, but we can make sure this is a pure cast. And we can go back to our recipe. And from our AC inventory now, instead, we're going to get has place for item. And that recipe and that has place is simply going to be from our, I think it's get outputs. So from our recipe, get outputs. We're going to get the first one because we can only have one output. And if it can, well, we'll set it can craft. Because if it has space, we've already checked here that we have enough resources. We just need to check what if we have space to actually pick it up. Otherwise, we can't craft it because there's no space in the inventory. So I'll move this a bit there. On the other hand, if this is false, if we failed, then we set our icon to bit hidden, so we'll say 0.6. We set our text here to empty because there's not enough items to build, and we can say can craft is automatically false because we don't have the resources to make the item in the first place. So normally right now if we run it, we'll still have this because it doesn't recognize, we don't tell it to call that. So normally that should be everything for our recipe. We should be able to go and close that. So I'll go to our crafting table and see what we can actually do with that. Okay, so the first thing I guess we can do is we can make our recipes visible. So to do that, we're going to make a sequence here. And at the end of the sequence, we will have this. And before we're going to have our actual function for the recipes. So we'll call that get all recipes. Maybe add all recipes because we're going to be adding them to the actual scroll box. And I don't think the scroll box is editable, which it needs to be. So make sure it's visible and we'll call it scroll box like that. And we'll just rename these because, so this is search bar. And here we have check box. Make sure all of these are editable. They are, they're a variable. And so what we'll do for the add all recipes is we're going to need to get data assets. And to do that, we need to say get asset registry. And from here, we can actually call our get data asset. So we want to say get assets by path. And so to get the data assets by path, how we do this is we need to put a path for them. And this path is pretty much where your files are. But to get it, what we need to do to be sure that we get the right path is in our project settings. We go and look for our, I think it is in Asset Manager, and we look for primary data asset types or asset types to scan. And we want to press the plus. And we're not actually going to need this permanently. We're just going to tell which directories it's in. And we're going to look for our Satisfactory, our blueprints, and our crafting. And so this is the actual directory we're looking for. So we can copy that and place it in here. We can then actually get rid of this. We don't need it for anything else. So close that, compile and save. And right now we have our thing that will go and get our actual assets. So we don't need these anymore because we're going to be spawning them manually. So back in our graph, we'll just actually call it here. Add all recipes, plug in our set keyword focus, and we can now go through them. So we start with a for each loop because we're pretty sure we're going to find something. So we'll just do a for each loop. We're then going to say get asset because this will convert it to an actual object reference instead of just the asset structure. We then need to cast to recipe because we need to know what type of data asset we're dealing with. And we can then say create widget, and this is going to create our actual widget that we need, and it's going to be called recipe, or it's going to be of type recipe. Like that, it'll make our recipe visible here, and we can attach the one that we actually are trying to add. Now, we're also going to make this into an array. So we're going to promote this to a variable with not a local one, sorry, promote it to a proper one, which we'll call list of recipes. And we're going to delete that and right click it to make it into an array. We're going to say add, and we're going to be adding this right here. Sorry, not that, reroute. Plug it in here, double click to add another one. And then we want to say update appearance for it. So we want it to actually calculate whether it can spawn or whether we can craft or not. So we'll add another reroute, and here we're going to say update appearance. And for update appearance to work, we need to get our AC inventory, plug it in here. Next, we want to bind the event that we made. So this is going to be bind event selected. And unlike before, I said we need to make sure that we delete them. We don't do that here because we never actually delete these once they're made. So we'll say create event, and we're going to need to create a matching function here, which we will call new recipe selected. And we can leave that right here. And finally, we want to reroute one last time. We want to get a reference to our scroll box, and we want to say add child and select the content and plug it in right here. Now, normally, if we go ahead and play, we have our iron ingot that appears, and this is caused by our blueprints right here, our crafting, having the exact recipe that we want. So for the next part, to do the proper testing, we're actually going to have to make some more actual recipes, because currently there's only one recipe, pretty useless. So we're going to rename this to DAR for recipe, and we're going to call it iron ingot, because that is what it makes, and we're going to rename our actual name here to iron ingot. And we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to call this one, it's not going to be iron ingot this time, but steel ingot. And so steel ingot is going to be an input, or output will be steel ingot, output 3. And it will take in 3 iron, but it will also take in 3 coal. So 3 here, and we're looking for coal. Go. And this will be called obviously steel ingot instead. And we can close that. And then we have one more, which is going to be the steel beam, which we're going to rename and change this to steel beam. And it is going to make, I think, 4. And it takes in, or no, sorry, I believe it makes 1, and it takes in 4 steel ingots, like that, and we only take in 4 steel ingots. So now, if we go and play again, we should have now 3 recipes that show up, with 3 different items, all transparent because we don't have any items in our inventory. Now, if we close this and play again, if we pick up our iron here, we can actually make something. Now, 80 doesn't seem correct unless it's 80 here and I change it. Okay, so it is. So 80 is correct because we take 1 iron and make 1 iron ingot. So that is correct. So it's working. So now the next thing we want to do for our left side is we want to make sure that this and this function. So what we want to do is not that complicated. It's just a basic search function. So we want to be mainly in the event graph. So inside of our event graph, what we want to do is we want to add our different inputs. So for now, we'll leave this on the side and we'll add it later. We want to check on our checkbox what happens. So if we change here, we want to do something. So because there's quite a lot to do, we're going to collapse this to a function, which we will call show recipes with tick. Plug this in here, and we're going to go and make that first, and then we'll come back to the other parts. So the first thing we want is we need to know what recipes we have. So we're going to go a for each loop through those. And we're simply going to check, because we've set them up, if they can craft. So we'll add a branch. And because the first thing we need to check is whether our input pin, our condition, if it is checked, is true. And if it is true, then, or sorry, if it is false, then we want to automatically set this to visible. Because that means that, well, it's there. Because we don't want to hide it, so we show it. On the other hand, if it is true, we want to get can craft. And if we cannot craft, so not Boolean, we then want to hide the visibility. So we want to say here, set visibility to, this time, collapsed. Make sure you select collapsed and not hidden, otherwise it will block still the area. Now, one other thing we need to do is we need to check whether the recipe we're currently selecting is the one that's about to disappear, because if it is, we want to hide it. Now, we want to still be able to select recipes even if we can't craft them, but if we want to try and craft them, we need to hide it if it's not the right one. So we want another branch here, and we want to check whether this right here is double equal to another one, which we're going to make right now. Is we can duplicate our list of recipe here, and we'll call this is the selected recipe. And we can right click because it needs to be a symbol type, not a array. So we can line this up, plug it in. If it is, we want to deselect recipe, but we don't have that function yet. So let's go and make that very quickly. So we're going to call deselect recipe. And I'm just going to leave it here for a second. We'll just finish this. So we'll call deselect recipe. And after deselect recipe, what we want to do is one last thing, but that's not done yet. So we'll leave that for now. We'll just do deselect recipe. So inside of deselect recipe, we want to check whether this is true. Because if it's not valid, meaning we just selected our first recipe, we don't want to deselect anything. So deselect recipe only when it is valid. And after this, we want to then say, well, our recipe is now empty because we no longer selected it. There's some other things we need to add, but we haven't set it up yet, so we can't do that right away. And with that, we now have something that will show and hide whether we have enough resources to craft the recipe. So if we go ahead and try that, if we go here and we select that, none of them appear. If we deselect, they all appear again, and vice versa. Works exactly as intended. Now we want to add the search bar to it. Now for the search bar, what we want is we want to get our search bar here. We want to get text. And the reason we do it this way is because we also want to take this into account when we're changing the checkbox. We don't want to just forget it. So we reroute that, right click and collapse the function as well. And we say show recipes with text this time. So we can actually put all of these into the recipe and attach them all here. It'll be easy to organize them. We'll just put the show here and the deselect at the top as well. And we can do the same thing for the search bars for recipe as well. And the same for the lists, same for the selected, and same for the scroll box and checkbox. Now the images I don't think we actually need. I'm just going to double check. No, we don't need them. So we can hide all of those. I think the other one is that one right there. There we go. So those aren't necessary, so we don't need to be able to see them here. So here we can plug this in here. And then we can go through and actually do our search. So what we want to do with this is we want to reroute first. And because text can't do this, sorry, not reroute, we want to actually toString, because text can't actually do something like contains, which is what we need to use to check whether our value exists. So what we do is we get our recipes again, another for each loop, and we're going to run through them and see whether they exist. So first we want to check if it can craft, and we're going to compare that to whether our check right here, our checkbox, is checked, and we're going to use not here. If it's not checked, or we can craft, so like this, then we want to perform a check here because it means that it's visible. And the reason we can't do whether it's collapsed is because we're going to be collapsing it here as well. So that means we would never have anything visible. So here we're going to add another one. We're going to have a reroute actually because we need this to be a bit further. And we'll bring this to the top because it's easier to put here. We're going to check if it is empty as well, because if it's empty, we also want to allow it to be visible. Now, what we'll do here is reroute this, and we'll say set visibility. And this time, just instead of having a second branch, we'll do a select, and we'll say if either this or this, there we go, then if it is true, so sorry, we haven't even set the substring up yet. So for the substring, we want to get our name from here. So we want the recipe, get, and we want to get our name, which we are then going to plug into the string here, which will make a type change. So let's line these up. And now if we do have it, so if it does contain, we want it to be visible. If not, we want it to be collapsed. So that should work if we go and compile and save. If we search and type in ingot, okay, sorry, it's working. It's just that we haven't told it to actually call this when we actually type. So we want to select our search bar, and on text changed, we want to call our show recipes with text right here, and that should do the trick. So there we go. Now, if we go and press E and we search for ingot, so apparently it's not working correctly. Oh, sorry, I got that wrong. We need to search in our name whether we have the substring that we're searching for, not the other way around. So that should work now. If we go and search for ingot, iron, steel, and for some reason ingot doesn't work. It recognizes steel beam as that. I think the reason for that is a mistake in here. Steel beam is still called steel ingot, yeah. So this needs to be steel beam. And now if we search for it, it should work just fine. If we search for ingot, we only get the 2 ingots. If we want to search for ingot here, actually we won't be able to test that because we don't have any items for it. So right now we can craft our ingots. We can only see this. But if we go and say steel beam, we'll still be able to hide it because we don't have crafting resources necessary. Okay, so next up, we'll do one thing very quickly before I forget it, is we want a way to actually close our actual inventory. So we're going to add a button here, which is going to go inside of the title canvas. It's going to go in the top right anchor, put it 0, put it 1 on the X, and put it fill on the right actually, make it better. And we'll put it at 60, and we'll make it red. And this is going to be called button close. It's going to go in our graph, and we're just going to call our event that we moved here on that button close. So call that on clicked, plug it in here, and with that, there we go. If now we go and let's try it, if we click, it should close. If we interact again, no problem. Working as intended. So next what we're going to do is we're going to do this right side. So this right side is going to be dedicated to the inventory. So let's get into that right now because it's starting to get a bit long. So another canvas panel. We're going to put it under the recipe. No, under the recipe, not next to it. So add it to the canvas panel itself. And let's just see where it goes. So it's going to go a line to the right and down 40. And we're going to make it 1 on the alignment here and 0 here. So now it appears like that. We want it to be 660 on the Y, just like the other one, and 320 on the X. And what we'll do with this is we will now add a few extra steps to it. We're going to add some text for what we'll call relevant items. So this is going to be relevant items, and that's what we set up earlier. So we'll leave that as is because it's getting a bit long, so I'm just going to go and speed things along at least for visuals. So all items is next, and that's going to be where our actual inventory is. So this goes down to like 100, I think. Just double check. Yeah, so that goes down to 85, sorry. And then we're going to have another horizontal box right in between these, which is going to be our relevant items. And so this one is going to be 30 right here. And it's going to be 50 on the Y, but it's going to be fill right here. For the items, we already have something set up, which is our inventory grid, which we made before. Not the inventory, but the actual grid itself. We're going to place it in there as well. And we're going to set it to 10 on the X. We're going to put it fill here. We're going to put it 10 on the Y. Sorry, not like that. We want it to be 10 on the right offset. And actually, sorry, make it at the top. It's easier. 115 or maybe 120 this time here. And down it's going to be 450. And so with this, we now have our inventory set up, or at least the basis of the inventory setup, so we can go into our crafting now. Actually, one last thing just to make sure. We want to make sure that this is variable, because this is the horizontal box for the relevant items. So we can compile, save, and we can go back here. We're just going to move all of these into a category of their own called inventory as well. Go plug that here. We can actually add the AC inventory as well. One thing we can do to make our lives a bit easier here is we're going to make a quick macro, which is going to get us the inventory. Instead of every time dragging from this and saying get inventory, we'll just use our macro. So I plug this on the output, and make sure you use a macro and not a function, because a function doesn't do a pass by value here, but does a copy. So it won't actually modify our inventory itself, which is what we need it to do. So for our inventory, we need to tell it first when an item is removed, when an item is added, that it gets modified. So to do that, we get our inventory, we say remove, and we apply that right here to let it know that it has removed something. And the same is obviously going to be for add as well. Plug it in here. Check our key, check our value. We can just make another reroute here. There we go. And now we just need to make it create. Now we just need to spawn our grid, let's say. So one thing we need to change for our grid, which I haven't even done in the original version, is we want to make sure that our max row here is 6. And the grid size we're going to set ourselves. But currently the problem with this is what I'm going to show you right now is if we run this, once we've set up our grid. So to spawn our grid, we need to get a reference to it. We need to set set size, grid size. And we're going to be setting that to our AC inventory max size, I think it is. Yeah. So plug these in. This will tell the inventory what its max size is. Then we want to get our inventory and say create background. And we want to leave our start index at 0. Next, we need to add our actual inventory items to that inventory. So we'll do our keys here, plug it in, make a for each loop, and do this right here. To be fair, this could be made into a function. I just don't know why I didn't think about doing that, but we'll do this for now because we only need it once anyway. We're going to get a reference to our inventory grid. We're going to say add item to grid. Plug it into the loop body, connect our array element here to the key, and then we want to get another reference to our inventory here and say find, plug that here, and plug our value right there. So now this will set up our inventory, and I'll show you the issue with that. So this is the problem. Our inventory currently looks like this. And so that's not great because we don't want our inventory to look like that, right? If we pick up our item, it appears, no problem. But it doesn't look very pretty, right? It's completely out of size. It's a big problem. So to fix this, we're going to have to make quite a few changes. So normally this should be set up already on your end. I'm just going to go through and do it myself here. But you just need to make sure you set the value for the grid to 50. Make sure that you select our new grid, put it to 50 by 50, pick our item up again. It stays visible and we drag it, no problem. I don't think, actually, I just realized, but we didn't do the new recipe selected earlier, so we actually need to do that. So sequence here, we want to call first deselect the current recipe because we're not using it anymore. We then want to, from here, call a function called show relevant items, and that is not done yet, so we're going to make it called show relevant items. And this function is going to be based on the inventory, so we're going to put it in the inventory category. Now, so here we're going to call show relevant items, and this takes an input of type, I think it is, yeah. So it's DA items, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah, DA items, and it is an array. So make sure you swap it. We can call it input simply. And to get this, we need to get this, quite literally, our variable called this, and we want to get relevant items. And actually that can be a pure cast. It doesn't need to be a non-pure. There we go. So now we can plug this in here. There we go. And we need an output for this. And this output is going to be a map. So let me just pull it up here to be sure I get this right. So it's going to be a map of type DA items, but it's going to be also the quantity that it actually has of those items. So like this. But before going any further, we actually need to make one more item, and we don't have that yet, so we're going to have to go and make that first. So another widget is what we're going to need here, and we're going to go back to our crafting or our Satisfactory blueprint area. So right click, user interface, widget, umg underscore crafting item, we'll call this one. So crafting item is going to be the important one, really. It's going to be about how which items are used for crafting for the inputs, and the outputs, how many we get, how close we are to having enough to make them, etc. So it's going to start off with a size box, as we might need it to be different sizes. So we're going to set it by default to 50 by 50. Make sure it is variable, and we can just rename it to size box. We then want a canvas panel, which plug in here. We want the canvas panel to be fill, no problem there. So for this, what we want is we want to start off by setting this to our desired, so we can check whether it's working correctly. First, we want to add an image, and this is just so we can differentiate from the background. We want this to be fill, and we want to simply set it to a kind of lightish gray. We don't see too dark and not too bright either. Then we want another image, which is also going to be fill, and this one is for the actual craftable item. So we're going to call it image craft. The first one doesn't need to be a variable, so we can uncheck that. Next, we want another canvas panel inside of our canvas panel. And this one, we want to make sure that it is, this one is, make sure you do it very exactly like me, otherwise it's not going to work. We'll start off by setting it to fill, and we're going to have to change it in a second. So first what we're going to do is we're going to add, actually, let me just double check something. Yeah, so first what we want to do is we're going to add an actual progress bar here. And this progress bar, we don't want it to be too big. We want it to be something like 20, I believe is good. And we want to anchor it to the bottom for now. And we're going to put it at 0, or we're going to put it to 1, sorry. And 1. And then we're going to put it 0 on both. And what we're going to actually do here is we're going to get our canvas panel. Now that we've fixed this, we want this to be fill now instead. And we want our canvas panel to be fill as well. But we want to actually modify it. We want to make sure that it's fill, but only to this specific point. And now make this one do the same and be specifically fill to this. What this does is it makes it so that when we scale, etc., it will be really scaling specifically on this spot and not the whole widget. And it's something that I took a lot of time to figure out. So I'm doing it here to make sure that you understand how it works. It's a bit of a strange one. Usually if you'd say fill to the whole screen, it would just scale up with the whole image, but it doesn't. It does it really weirdly. So this is what I found to work. So another thing we want to add is we're going to add another image here. And this is going to go in our canvas panel, and it's going to be a lot smaller. So it's going to be 20 as well. It's going to be in the bottom right. And we're going to do the same kind of trick. First, we want to make it a bit gray. And we're actually going to use this and make it the same kind of orange here. And we want its background, if possible, to be gray like this as well, if we can do that. Sorry, background image, not the other one. So we want that to be a bit darker. We will, sorry, not that, this one. This we can reset because the fill will just leave white. And so what we want to do here is we want this to be kind of in the same spot. So we want to put it at 1 and 1 on the alignment as well. And except this one, we want it to be something like 30. We want it to be a lot shorter. We want it to cover a bit over half. So something like this is good. Then we want to say fill as well. And we're going to also drag it down, just like the other ones. And we're also going to drag it across this time, so that it stays specifically in its area. And the last thing we need is we're going to need an actual horizontal box. And this one is going to go into the canvas panel, which we're also going to set to fill, which is going to go right down to here as well. Same spot as the other ones. There we go. And to make it fill, we'll just put 0 on all of them, because this one is very simple. It's just fill. And we actually want to give it a bit of an offset on the sides, because it's where the text box is going to go. So inside of here, we want to make sure our image actually is at the back here. Don't want it to be visible. And our text box, we're going to have to make it, we're going to change the text first. So I'm going to put it something like 2 out of 1, because that's what it's going to be for. It's to count how many items are there. And just like before, sorry, we need to actually put this in a scale box as well. So wrap with scale box, there we go. And we want the scale box to be centered here. We want it to be fill here, and that'll actually center it properly. For the text this time, we don't want to go back, but we're going to make a slight modification to it. First, it needs to be variable, text box underscore items. And we just put it to 20. We want it to be a bit smaller. Now, it's going to stay as big as that because that's how much space it's given currently. So we don't need to worry about that. I just want to test whether our image is the right size. Ingot here. Icon. So it might be a bit too big. So we might want to make this a bit smaller here. To like 30% is probably better. And then we want this to be 0, I think. So here we actually want it to be 5 on both sides. So sorry, -5 on both, -2 actually. -2 on both sides. It will just give it a bit more space because we can't go a bit out. And size-wise, it should be adapted. They should all be the right size normally, or are they not? No, so they're not adapting to the size because... Yeah, okay, so I made a mistake here. The canvas panel should have been set to fill. And because of that, these are all wrong now. So we need to put these back to where they were. So I'm actually going to just... I think getting rid of this might not be the quickest. Sorry, so we just want to make this fill again. So offset of top is 9. So move it pretty much back to where the canvas is. Same for you. We want to put you back to 30% or 100% here. So pretty much just drag everything till it's 100% again, because it can only go as far as the canvas in which it is. So our horizontal box is fixed now. There we go. We just need to resize everything correctly. So now it's all filled up. We just need to modify this, put it back on 0 as well. And that'll do the trick visually. So now normally our progress bar, if we modify it, it's a bit yellow. That's correct. Maybe make it a bit brighter than that, I think. Yeah, that'll do better. So the progress bar we can leave as just progress bar. And I think we can get to it now. Yeah, so now we can get to the graph itself. For this, so for the graph we have a few things we need, a few functions. First one is going to be modify structure. Structure quantity. and it's going to take in the quantity and modify it. So it's going to actually need a structure here that we haven't made yet. So structure, this is going to be of st inventory. It's going to be here, and we're going to say set members. We're going to get our quantity, plug the quantity in here, and then we're going to call our second function, which we don't have yet, which is called update progress bar text, because it's going to update both of those. Call it here. Compile, save. And then what we need is we need a few more of these. We're going to need something called read only, which we won't be using just yet, but we might need it in the future, so we'll just make it here in case. Another variable we'll be calling crafting quantity, which is going to be an integer. And finally, the last one, which is going to be the slot size, and that's going to be a 2D vector. Compile, save, and we can get to our other one last function we need, sorry, is update basic appearance. We'll start with update basic appearance because it's the default kind of one. Plug in structure here. Then we want to plug in our crafting quantity here, plug that here, and connect it. There we go. Next, what we want to do is we want to get our image to craft, and we want to say set brush from texture, plug it in here. We want to get our structure, break our structure, get our data asset, get our image from our data asset, plug it into the texture. And after doing that, we simply want to call our update progress bar text. Now we also need to call this in the event construct as well. So let's just go here, and we're going to say update basic appearance. And to make sure that this doesn't cause any issues, we want to make sure that we tell this right here to use its actual values, even if they're resetting them, because we want to just do it this way instead of rewriting the code. Next, we want to get our slot size. By default, we'll put this to 100 actually instead of 50. We're going to split. We're going to get our size box and say set width, set height, and plug these two right in here. There we go. And now we just need to do our update progress bar, and we can go back to our main thing and finish everything off. So with our structure right here, actually one last thing before I forget, we want to make sure that all of these, except for the read only, so this one we want to make instance editable, but every other one we want to be instance editable and exposed on spawn, because we're going to change them once we spawn our different actors. Compile. And so we want to break this. We want to get our quantity. So get this and check if it is different from 0. Now the reason we're doing this is if the quantity we currently have available for the item, because what these are going to be used for is in our recipe, we'll be able to tell in the main screen, which we haven't done yet, in the center, we'll say, well, we have iron ingot is equal to, iron ore is equal to iron ingot, but we have, for instance, 0 out of 1, or we have 15 out of 1. And so based on that, if the quantity here being how much we have available is 0, then that means that we don't have any. So we need to make sure that we treat the items like it can't be crafted. So it's a bit different. So how we treat them then is we get our text box and we say set text right here. And the value we're going to set it to is simply we're going to get our crafting quantity, which is how much we need. And that's the only value we're going to display instead of what we did before. In addition, we're also going to set justification here to the right instead. In addition, because we don't want to be able to craft, we're going to hide the progress bar. So we're going to set visibility to hidden because we don't want to show that there's any item or enough items left to craft. And then the other side, we want to show our image here. I think it's 86. I didn't give it a name, sorry. So this is image underscore corner because there's no real name for it. There's no real identity, I guess you could say. So set visibility here, we want to make it not hit testable, but it needs to be there, it needs to be visible. And one last thing we need to do is we need to get our scale box. If we didn't, no, it's not a variable. So we need this to be a variable, and this is our scale box. And we'll want to, from our scale box, we want to slot as horizontal, and we want to set its horizontal alignment to right, so that the text is really on the right of the slot. Otherwise, it will end up still centered, and that's not correct. So now for the true. So if we do succeed. So if we do succeed, what we want to do is we want to get from our structure our quantity. We want to convert it to a float, so to float. Then we're going to get crafting quantity and do the same thing to float. And we're going to divide one by the other. So divide our total quantity by the quantity we need. We will then clamp this float, because if we're over 1, let's say we have 10 items and we divide by 1, we would get 10. We still want to stay at 1 because this is going to be used for the percentage of the craft. So we want to say set percent to this value right here. Plug this into true. And next we just need to make sure everything is visible. So we can just copy these because we're going to be using them pretty much exactly as they are. Sorry, copy and paste here. For the text, it'll be a bit different. For the text, we need to say this time we can remove that and we can format this. And we want to say our total divided by our needed or required works as well. So needed goes here, and then we can just get our quantity from here again and plug it in to the total. There we go. Now we want to center this to the left. We want this to be centered now, and we want to set our scale box here. Actually, I forgot it. We want to send this also back to the fill because that's what it's left at currently. And then we want to invert these two, so this becomes not testable. This becomes hidden. So that'll do it for this. We can now head back to crafting, and we shouldn't need this anymore. After this, we're going to need another for each loop, and we're going to get from this. So this is why we did this, so we could create these. We're going to say get inputs. Now, I'm actually not going to do this straight away because to do this, we need to have our center part built, which we don't have yet. So I'm just going to finish setting up the items and the relevant items first. So complete it here. So once we're done with this loop, we can actually update our selected item to this, like that. And from here, we then need to make some modifications. So first we want to say set keyboard focused again, because we're not on the same widget. So we want to tell it to focus again. A lot of stuff is still missing here that we haven't done yet. So we need to get to that once we get to it. But for now, this should do the trick for swapping our selected. We just need to now build our show relevance, because that's going to be what is actually important here. And it's quite long. So bear with me, there's a bit of spaghetti in here, but we're going to get it done. So just detach this for now, we'll call it later. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to get our relevant ones and we want to clear. We don't want to have them anymore, we're resetting, we want to restart. Next, what we need to do is with our inventory, we're going to have to go through it. We're going to have to check what values we have and how to use them. So we'll start with our values in the for each loop, and we can get going. Now this time, I'm sure we're not using a break, just using this one because we do need to go through everything. So we break our inventory. We want to save our current quantity, and we want to save our current item. So save this as well. Current data asset. There we go. Plug this in here. Line it all up. There we go. So what we'll do is we check whether our input pin, so get input, I think we just call it input simply, does it contain our item, our current item that we're looking at? Does it contain it? If it does, then we want to take this into account and start storing the information. So the information we're going to store is actually going to be our return here. We're going to promote this to a variable. We're going to call L all items. And the reason we have to do this like this is, and not just call it return, is because we need to do a bit more fiddling than that. So this is going to be called return here. So with this, we're going to add an item, and it takes in our data asset as a key. So we just get our data asset here. And for the actual input here, what we need to do is we need to get our current quantity. We need to add it to whatever we can find in here that already exists, if we already found one. So if we already did this once, like we had 2 items of the same data asset type, then we want to know, so we add them together. And we just need to make sure that if we did find it, so we have a select int here, because otherwise we'll be calling this and we don't want to. If we did find it, we put it in A. If not, we simply put our current quantity into B, and we plug that into our add. Now, what this does is it will go through each value and see if we find a data asset that fits in the input, and we'll store the amount of that item that we have available. And once we know that, we can then go through each of them and say, well, this is how many items we can create, because there's only a certain amount of space. We only have 6 slots of space available in that horizontal box, so we can only fit 6 items. So we need to make sure that only if we have 2, for instance, types of items, we need to split them. We need to have 3 of each. But at the same time, if we have only 1 stack of 1 item, we don't want to have 1 stack and 3 of the others. We can have 5 and 1. So that's what we need to do now. And so to do that with our all items here, we're going to promote that to another variable, which we will call the L return. And so the whole reason of this being like this is we're going to modify this one, but we're still going to return the whole list even if we can't spawn the whole list. So what we do is we do a while loop. And this while loop is going to check whether at any point this is empty. So as long as it is not empty, and another condition, which is if our item's stored. So I think this is another local variable we'll need. So no, so we need an actual new one here, and it's of type UMG items. So we'll call this stored items, and it's going to be UMG item right here. Yeah, and we're going to convert that to an array. And as long as this one, its length is inferior to 6, sorry, like this, inferior to 6, we plug it in here. As long as these 2 conditions are true, we can keep checking to see what items we add. So to do that, we get our all items, we get our keys, plug our keys in right here, and we're going to do a for each loop with a break this time. So for each loop with break. So what this does is we're now going to save once again our current data asset. So we can just copy this because it's the same thing. And we'll do the same with this time a new variable, which is our max stack, because we need to know the maximum we can have. And we want to promote this to a local variable. We will call current max quantity. Sorry. That's plug it in. And what we want to check here for our actual break is we need to know whether this actually happens. Now, as long as this happens, we can keep going, but if it doesn't, we need to actually break this. Otherwise, we'll be adding items past the actual valid location, let's say. So this goes all the way around and back to the beginning. Now, if this doesn't happen, we want to create a widget. And the widget we're going to make is an item. And it's this one right here. And what we want to input is our key. What we want is we want to get from here, we want to find our current data asset, and we want to clamp the value between this and our current max quantity. And the reason we do this is because right here, this is one data asset, how much we have in the entire inventory. So we need to make sure that we max it out here because an item can only have a certain amount and we can't let it have any more. We want to make sure we set the grid scale to 50. The item structure actually, sorry, is where that should go, not there. That goes into the item structure. The key is not necessary because this isn't being sorted in an inventory, so it doesn't matter. And we should have read only, which we check to say it's true. So if this happens, what we want to do is we want to actually store this value. So we want to say add item to this array. And there we go, we just line it up. And what we need to do is we need to now update our items. And so to do that, we just need to check whether this ever becomes empty, because if it does, we want to make sure that we delete the array element, or the map element, sorry. So we're going to clamp this once again to our max here, so we probably could have copied the whole thing. And what we want is we will say whether this value here, so the current value minus what we just removed from it, if this is inferior or equal to 0, then we want to say remove this data asset. I'm going to say remove, plug this in, line it up on true. And otherwise here we're going to say add to modify the original value to what we currently have on the subtraction here, like this. So now with that, we've created all the widgets we need, but the problem is they're not sorted. Currently there would be just 1, 2, 3, whatever type of item it is. Also, I just realized we need to also set the data asset, otherwise it won't be correct. There we go. So now the next step is, once our while loop is complete, we need to sort them. So we're going to add a sequence, and for the first part of the sequence we'll do the sorting, and the second part will be the conclusion. So just very quickly with the conclusion, what we do is we say for each loop, go through these, and we just say for our relevant box here, we say add child to horizontal box, and we plug this in like this. There we go. And then we say return, which takes in our return value, and not the all items. Make sure you use the return one. Make sure that you set return here, not all items. So what we need to do now is we're going to have to make a triple for loop to make sure that we can reorganize these items. So we want to get our stored here. We want to get our last index, and we want to do a for loop. And we want to set this to the last index, and plug this in right here. Now this is going to get a bit spaghetti, so I'll try and make this as clear as possible with some reroutes. We want another for loop immediately after, nothing else, just the for loop. And the value we want to put in here is +1 for the first index, because we want to do it from where we start, +1. There's no point checking against itself. Once again, the ending is going to be last index, as that's usually the case when using the same for loop and check-in. And what we want to check is from here, we're going to check whether the item within here is different, or the same, sorry. So we want to get a copy, and we don't just want to check whether the item is the same, we want to check whether the data asset is the same. So we want to get data asset here, and we're going to use the same thing, but with the initial value, so our first index right here. So if these two are equal, so right here, then we want to do another for loop. And yeah, this is going to sound a bit strange, but usually when you sort things, you check via a string. So it's much easier to do than this. So that's why we have to do this with a third loop, because the third loop is now going to say, well, I noticed something is identical, and it's going to go back through the list and see whether that first identical one is can be replaced somewhere else down the line before itself. So to do that, we need another for loop here, but this one is going to be a for loop with break. And the index, the first index, is going to be this one right here. It's going to be our second index. So just to help, we're going to reroute this all the way to the first, and I'm going to mark here B, and B means it's for the second one. And because we're going to need this one here for the last index, sorry, no, I got that wrong. This is going to be for the first index, and this is going to be for the last one. So this is A. So just mark it here, just so it's very well written. Now next what we do is, once again with our B, we're going to go here and we're going to do the same thing pretty much as this. We're going to copy that, but this time we're looking for different instead of equal. So if they're different, that means that we have an item that is not the same and can be swapped. So if that happens, then we're going to swap them. So if this condition is met, we can call here from our array swap, and the items we want to swap is our C value right here for the index, and we also want to swap obviously our B value right here. And once this is done, we can only do it for one. So we want to break it and go back to the beginning. So just add another reroute here. And I think that will do it. No, we need to first set this to here as well. Otherwise it won't work. There we go. So that'll sort through our arrays. And now normally if we go and pick up our item here and here, so now we have coal and iron, they're visible. If I click on iron here, our iron ingot shows up. If we click on steel, we get both of them because both of them are there. If you click on steel beam, none of them show up because none of them are relevant to the actual construction. So now we can finally get into actually building our items. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's start by just making our widget. Let's start by making it visible. So what we need is, once again, a new canvas panel to set it in the center this time. So I'm just gonna put it here. So we'll call this one on the right for all items. And in the center, we'll call it crafting, because that is exactly what it's for. So this one, unlike the other one, we can just call in the center. So we're just going to put it center top, so it's easier to use. 0.5 in alignment, 0 on the X, and then we want to put it on 40 on the Y, so it's below the title. And 450 is the amount of space we need here, and it can go down by 660 like all the others. So for this one, we're going to need one more canvas panel in the center, which is just going to contain, it's just to help store things, it's just easier. And I believe, there we go. We're going to set it to 0.5 on the alignment for both, because that's easier to manage. 0, 0, and then, sorry, minus 100 here. And size is going to be 420 by 250. Inside of it, we need a few things. So first, we're going to add some text for the title for what we're actually trying to craft. So the text box, make sure it's variable. So text box underscore name. And this is going to be centered top at 0.5 on the alignment on the X so that we can center it easier. We want it to be 20 down so it's not in the middle, or at least on the top, sorry. I want to make it a bit smaller, doesn't need to be too big. Center the text, and we'll just change it to regular. We'll make it a bit bigger there, even though it doesn't really matter too much. And that should do it for this. Next, we want to add a horizontal box. Well, actually, no, we'll start by adding our, what's it called? Our progress bar. And our progress bar is going to go right at the bottom. It's going to be aligned to the bottom there. It's going to be 0, 0, 0. Sorry, not that. We want it to be actually quite big. We want it to be 45. But make sure we set the alignment to 1 so that it appears above. And for the color, we'll make it once again the kind of orange like this. There we go, that should do. Not perfect, but it's okay. All of the oranges are a bit different, not a problem. Actually, for the text, you want to make it empty, so we're sure that it's set empty by default. So this is just progress bar, it's already variable, we don't need to change it. Next, what we want to do is we want to add another text box here. We want to add a text box to say how many more times we need to hit the hammer, as we do in the game, to finish crafting. So this is going to be the same thing, bottom 1 on the Y and 0 on both of these. And I think we can actually move this one up a bit. So we'll put it at 50, I think, or 40. I think this one is 45. Yeah, we put 45. So we'll put 45 here, center the text, and that'll do it. It's not perfect, but it's okay. So this will be, for instance, times 15. We'll be updating it once it needs to be accurate. Next thing we need is an image. And this image, I didn't make anything for it, but it's pretty much going to be an arrow just to indicate that we're crafting from that to this. So we will center it and put it on 0.5 on the Y and then say 0 and make it 40 by 40 so it actually is correct. So just move it a bit to the side, sorry. Maybe 40 is probably better here. There we go. Next one is a horizontal box. And this is going to go to the left, and that's going to be all our items. So this is going to be, if I'm correct, 200 by 60 here. Yep. And it's going to be centered as well 0.5 on the Y alignment and 0 on that, and 50 on the left. Sorry, no, it's aligned to the center left, and then it's 50. There we go. So we can move this a bit further then, because it's too tight. And now we need to add our last thing, and that is the crafting item. So that is going to be crafting item, and it's going to go right here. And so this is going to be, I think, 80 by 80, we'll say. And so we want it to be center right, and 0.5 on the Y as well, and 0 on the Y because of that. And I think, yeah, putting it at 1 here so that it lines up perfectly. So we can compile and save. And so now we need to get into modifying all of this so that it actually does something. So make sure the second text box here is also variable. So this will be text box, we'll call it hammer. Maybe not the best name, but it will do the trick. Here we want to have HB for inputs, and it needs to be variable as well. The image doesn't need to be variable, doesn't matter. And that should be everything in here that we need. No, we need one last thing, and that is the button. We need a button to actually click to craft. So we're going to center this, and we'll just make it really big. It doesn't really matter too much what we do here. So 0, we're going to make it 200, and maybe even that 300 by 180, I think is good, and just move it down like this to something like 60. So now if we go and look, we finally have everything ready. We finally have our complete crafting table ready to go, and let's get into getting this to work. So the error was because this currently doesn't have anything set up, so it doesn't know what to do, and it tries to use its data asset, which doesn't exist. So that's fine. So I think the first thing that we'll do is we will set up the crafting inputs. It's not that difficult, but just it's easier to do it first, that way it's out of the way. So what we want is we'll actually organize all this into crafting first. So not close. Close can go into, we'll put it in inventory for now. Input there, progress bar, hammer, name, and crafting item. And then we can just remove the close back to default. There we go. So for the button 176, which we should probably name to button craft, we want to use that for on clicked and also on released. So actually, sorry, not on clicked, we want on pressed. So craft, there we go, on pressed. Now on pressed, we want to start attempting to craft. So before that, we need to create a timer handle. So in here, I want to call it timer, or more like crafting handle. There we go. And this is a single variable, and it is a handle for a timer. So what we're going to do with this handle is grab it here, and we want to check if it is valid. And if it is valid, we want to cancel it. And the reason for that is because we're going to add a spacebar for crafting as well. That way, if the player wants to craft by pressing once and leaving so that it crafts automatically, then he can do that. So we then want to say clear and it validates if it's true. If it is not, we want to reroute and just simply reattach this. And we'll add a branch, because it doesn't matter what we're doing. We need to first know if our selected recipe, we can craft it. We also need to check, sorry, before this, whether this is valid or not, because if we have no recipe selected, because by default we don't, then we can't craft. So make sure you do that as well. So next we want to set, once this is all done, we can set a timer by event. And this is going to be how quickly we can craft. So we're going to put, I think 0.45 is good. You can feel free to change this, make sure it's looping, create event, and we're going to create a matching event, which we will call CE hammer. Very simple. That's what it does. And we're going to set our handle here. Now, if this fails, so once we're done, once we release, we want to stop the hammering. So very simply, copy this, paste it here, and we're done. What we'll do here is we want to make a new variable, which is going to be the crafting. and it's going to be an integer, which is going to be called crafting progress. There we go. And it's going to be an int, not a byte, an integer. And we simply increment it here every time. Now, there we go. Now, for what we do here, we want a branch, and we need to know how much we can hammer an item, and we don't have that yet. So to get that, we need to actually set up in our Satisfactory the fact that our crafting items actually have a quantity of hammering needed to be fixed. So I'm simply going to call a variable hammer. It's going to be an integer, compile and save. And what we need to do is we need to set these to something like 5 for the steel ingots. We'll say 6 for the steel beam, and we'll just say 3 for the iron ingots. There we go. So now that we've done that, sorry, we don't need the recipe anymore. I don't know why it's still open. What we do is we get our selected recipe, we get our recipe itself, and we get our hammer. And that is the amount of times we need to hit. So if this is ever double equal to our hammer, that means that it's complete. That means that we are done with our actual crafting. So if we're done, we need a function to say, well, we're done. So we're going to make that. We're going to reroute here, collapse this to a function by right clicking here. And we're going to say crafting or finished crafting item. Like that. And then we're going to make another one, which we're going to call update crafting progress bar. There we go. Now we can get rid of our reroute. We don't need it. So this will be update crafting progress bar, and that is finished. Now the last thing we can do is we'll just add the ability for the spacebar. So get jump here, because that's going to be spacebar. And on started, we're going to also check here for our handle. On started, like that. And if our item here, once again, is, here is valid, we're going to check if we can craft. Sorry, if this is not valid, that means there's nothing being called already. If there is, we want to call this simply and cancel it as well. And so here what we'll do is we will say like this, we will copy that and paste it right here. There we go. So compile and save. And with that, we should have our crafting system. What we can do to see if it's working, we will update this. We'll make this, to see if it's working. So for that, let's just go into getting our recipe again. It's going to need that a lot. We'll just get these two actually. We'll say this minus one another. And this is going to be how much crafting is left to do. So for this one, we get our text box hammer and say set text, not the tooltip, set text right here. So that, plug it in. And then we'll do the same thing with this for the actual, we'll do the division here. We'll divide it like this, and we will simply convert the end pin to a float. We will get our progress bar and say set %. There we go. So actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we can't actually do this just yet because we still need to tell ourselves what the crafting item is. So I don't know if it will work. We can try. If we select, well, actually we can't select anything because we don't have anything. If we select iron ingot and we press here. Okay, so it's, as you can see, it's not going to the end, so it just keeps going. But there's a bit of an issue because for some reason it shouldn't be negative. Okay, so that's because I did it the wrong way around. It should be the opposite. It should be hammer on the top. And on the other side, we just do this. This works fine. So let's try that again. Pick up an iron, and iron should take 3. And there we go. So it does work. So also we can check whether if it works with spacebar very quickly by just taking another one. And if we click spacebar here, it works. It crafts as well. No problem. So let's get into making the rest work. Let's make it actually craft. The problem is in our select recipe, we don't actually select a recipe yet. So let's do that. New recipe selected. We can finally do all this now. So If a new recipe is selected, we want to reroute this, and we want to add a new item. So we want to break this, and we want to say create widget. And the widget we're looking to make here is our crafting item. So this needs to take in our structure here, which I'm going to split, and we need to do a bit of extra. So we want to find here, and what we're looking to find is our data asset right here. And if we did find it, we want to select it, but if we didn't, we want to set it to 0. And so what this means is we want to set the structure quantity here to this int. On the other hand, the quantity here, which is what we need, is how much is needed for the crafting quantity. And the data item is obviously this works just fine. So if this works, we have a new variable, a new int here, or a new list we're going to make. So we're going to promote this to a variable, which we'll be calling crafting items. And it's going to be deleted, and then right click to convert to an array. So we can say add, and what we're going to add is this return value right here. Then we also want to say this time add child, sorry, we need our horizontal box first, this one right here. Add child to horizontal box, plug it in like this, and there we go. So this time, next we need to say how we want it to align. So we're going to say set horizontal alignment. We're then going to say set vertical alignment. And we want it to be center on both. And then we want to say set size, which is the top part pretty much. And we want to say, we want it to be fill. So make sure it's like this. And finally, the last thing before I forget, we need to also make sure that we set this to 50, because otherwise it's not going to be visible. Now, one other thing we add here, if we are crafting here and we swap, or sorry, if we're trying to craft here, we need to make sure that we stop, because this means that we swapped we selected a new recipe, and if we selected a new recipe, we shouldn't be allowed to continue crafting. So we want to clear and invalidate here on true. We have one last function we need to make here, which we don't have. So I'm just going to reroute here and create it. And the function is going to be called, I think it is, yeah. So we're going to call show crafting visuals. So this can go here. And normally now, if we go ahead and select a crafting recipe like this, we have our recipe that appears. Same for the steel ingots. Oh, sorry. So it's working. It's just not deleting itself. So let's go and fix that. We need to add that, I think. Okay, so we'll just add that right here. We're just going to get our HP inputs, say clear children, plug it in right in front of it, and connect it like that. Let's just make sure, just move it slightly to the side. There we go. So now normally if we go and select our crafting, we have the iron ingots, the steel ingot. We have for steel ingot, we have these two, and otherwise we have iron ingot, basic just iron. So we still have that same error because we haven't set anything up yet. So for setting that up, it's in here. We need to go into our show crafting visuals. So show crafting visuals, rather simple. We just want to first set the crafting progress to 0 because we're starting. And then what we want to do is we want to set visibility right here. And the visibility we're looking for is we want the progress bar to show itself. Currently right now it's all done by default, it's all visible, but we want to hide them when we don't have anything to craft. So crafting item here as well. We want to get the name, the name here. And we also want to hide the hammer name as well. I want to make it visible. And then we want to get our text box name here, and we want to set text like this, and we want to set it to what we're trying to craft. So we will get our select recipe, we will get our recipe, and we will get name like this, plug it in there. Then we want to call our update craft in progress bar, because now we know what asset we're talking about, or not what asset we're talking about, but we know how many there are. We then want to say item result, we want to get our crafting item, and we want to say update basic appearance. And now we have these values. So now we can say from our selected recipe, we want to get our outputs, get outputs. Did we have that here? Get outputs? No, we didn't. We have get inputs. Get outputs here. Select it, and we want to get, not a reference, we want to get a copy. And because of how we set this up, we only want to set the actual crafting quantity here, and the item data, but not the structure. We want the structure to stay 0 because we want it to appear like if it's, or we want it to actually look like only it has this part, not the actual 2 out of 1. So now normally if we go and select a recipe, we should have something proper. There we go. So now as you can see, we select the beam, shows us a beam. If we have the items, the bar shows that we have enough items, and it shows only 3 here. Same thing here, no problem. So now if we close, we still have an error, and that's because this by default, we should probably give it something, but we're just going to say this right here, this right there, that, and the actual progress bar are going to be hidden by default. And so now if we go and do that again, we see nothing, but the instant we select something, it shows us the name, it shows us the information, and it changes every time to the right one. So now we just need to do the finish crafting, and we have finished this whole thing, I'm pretty sure. Most of it is done now. Actually, one thing we still haven't set up is if we go and deselect a recipe, so let's say we hide, if we select this and we hide it, we don't actually do anything. So we need to decide what to do then as well. So in our deselect first, we'll just fix that. We have a function called deselect recipe right here. Currently it just does that. What we want it to do is we also want to get our HB here for our inputs. And we want to say clear children right here, get it attached. We want to clear our crafting, obviously, because they're the same thing. So clear. Then we want to set our item result to hidden. So if I get that, or sorry, our crafting item here, to set visibility to hidden. And we can also do the same thing, I think in our show crafting, so we can also add this here as well. And that should do the trick. Now if we go and play and we deselect our recipe because we can't craft it, it should disappear, but if I select iron, it reappears, and there's no issue whatsoever. Good. So let me just check which functions we have, just so I don't get anything wrong. Okay, so the last thing we need to do, I think at least the last thing we need to do is the show, is the finish crafting item. That's the last thing we have left, and then we should be done with this very, very long tutorial. I think we're at least in my recording currently, it is 3.5 hours in, so it is getting very long. I hope I can cut it down at least to 3. That'd be best, because this is very, very long. Selected, but I hope at least it's a complete tutorial and everybody has learned what they wanted to learn for making an inventory like this and attaching it to a crafting system, because this does a bit more than just craft. So I hope you appreciate it. So we want to get our selected recipe first. We want to get our inputs, and we want to actually save these, and we want to also do the same thing for the outputs. So we want to promote this to a variable we will call inputs. And then from here, we're going to get the recipe, and we're also going to get the outputs. So right there, and we want to promote that as well. So promote this to a variable, outputs. Make sure they're local. I'm not mentioning it, but it is a local variable, sorry. So there we go. And what we want to check is we want to get our our inputs here, and we want to check if they're empty. So if it is not empty, we want to do a while loop. And what we're doing pretty much is we're going through each of them and adding them to our inventory. Sorry, no, I got that wrong. The first thing we're doing is we're actually going through this and removing the items from the inventory. So to do that, we need to actually find those items in the inventory first, because we know that we had the items to craft in the first place because we have a check before to do that. So we need to get our inventory, we get our keys this time, and we do a for each loop with them. Once we go through them, we then, well, we'll save this as a key, sorry. So we'll say key. And now we're going to go and search each individual one to see if we can actually find it. So we'll get our inputs. We're going to get a copy, and we get a copy of 0 because either way we're going to be removing them as we go. So 0 will always be the one we're looking for. We're going to split, and we're going to check whether the data item or the data asset is equal to our inventory reference find the key, sorry. So let's just move this up a bit. We're going to get our key at the bottom here, like that, and split this. If this is equal, then that means that we found an item and we can start removing from that item. So before we do that, we need to know how much we need to remove and how much the item can take. So we want here our quantity remaining. So this is how much is left in this item. So we're going to reroute, promote this to a variable which we'll call quantity remaining. There we go. Type that correctly without looking good. So we'll subtract from here. The same thing is here. And whatever's left, so we'll say if this is inferior or equal to 0, and that means that there's none left. That means that we consume the entire item to make this craftable. So if that's not the case, we can get a reference to our inventory and say add. And what we'll be adding is our key, because that's going to remain. So just get a reference to it right here. Reference to it like that. So this is on false, and quantity will be the subtraction, and we're going to get the data item right here, which will be connected as well. Now, if this is true, meaning we are equal to 0, then we can just simply remove this key from the inventory. Now, on the other hand, once we don't find it, so on the then, sorry, we need to update our value. So update this. So what we need to do is we need to get our quantity remaining, and we'll do the same calculation. We'll say this minus quantity remaining, because for all we know, there could be more quantity required here than we have quantity available. So we need to check. So if this is also inferior or equal this time, just like over there, then we want to get rid of it entirely. And so we'll say inputs remove index 0. So we don't need to change it, we just say remove index 0. Otherwise, if this isn't the case, we will say set array element index 0 once again, and we will be splitting this to this value right here will be the new quantity, and the obviously the data item will be right there. So we compile. Next, what we need to do is what happens when we finish this loop, the for loop, not the for loop, sorry, the while loop here, is we're going to do the same thing but with the outputs. But for the outputs, it's much easier. We just do a for each loop like this. And because we already set a function up like this and we have a reference to our AC inventory, we can simply say pick up item, and we can use the override that we made all the way at the beginning so that we can just simply add an item and it will search for itself where it can go without bothering us too much. Now, on the second part, we need another sequence here just to make it more readable. And we need to do with our list of recipes here, a for each loop. And we need to check, or we need to update its appearance. And the reason we need to update its appearance is because now we have less items and we've already crafted an item. So it needs to know how things have changed. And next, we need to call a new function here, or we're not going to make it, we're going to make our own function. So we'll add another sequence again, and we'll just do the second half first. So once we're here, we need to tell our crafting progress to go back to 0 because we've finished crafting. We then want to call update crafting progress bar because it's back to 0. And we can check whether we can keep crafting, because if we can't, then we need to stop. So, but if we can, we don't want to invalidate the timer. So what we'll do is we will get our selected recipe. We will say can craft. And if we can craft, then we will let it know that it doesn't need to stop. But if it does, we need to make sure that it can't, when it can't craft, we invalidate the timer. So there we go. Now we need to do this here. And what this is for is it's just going to modify the grid of the inventory, because that isn't done by default with this. So to do that, we need a few for each loops. We're going to need a bit of space here. What we need to get is we need to get our inventory right here, our grid. We're going to get inventory grid, and we're going to clear it. So this is just an easier way to do it. We're going to get keys here, and we're going to go for the array like this. And we simply, no, sorry, not the keys. We need the values, not the keys. We're going to get the values, and we're going to set it like this. And we're going to say remove from parent. Then we're going to clear this grid, this array, or this map, sorry. God, I'm getting tired. It's been quite long. Then from our inventory, because that is being updated, we can actually create the same thing that we did at the beginning. So let's just copy this actually. Right here, go here, copy this. It's on the event begin play or event construct, sorry. Just copy it and paste it right here. Plug it in there. And one last thing we need to do here is we need to do the relevant items again. So we're going to, from our for each loop here, show relevant items because they also need to be updated. So we're going to get our selected recipe. We're going to get relevant items. Plug it into the inputs. So right here with our relevant items, we're going to actually modify the the crafting items. So we want to get a reference to our crafting items here. Not our recipe, sorry, our crafting items, my bad. For each loop. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our structure. We're going to break it here. And we're going to say find in a map. The map is going to be that one all the way at the end. And once again, we'll do the same select integer here. Like this. And this time what we do instead is we're going to set members here, and we're going to update our quantity if it needs to be updated, which it probably most likely will because it's all part of the same thing. And then we'll have to say from here, update the progress bar and text. And normally this should be everything. That should have done the entire thing. Right now, if we go and start crafting, if we select iron ingot and we press spacebar, it'll start crafting. As you can see, the relevant items appear. Okay, there's a bit of an issue though. It's filling up the inventory when it should be stacking on top of the inventory. So that's not correct. Let's see what's wrong there. I think the issue is obviously lying in the function here. So I'm going to see, no, not that one. It's in pickup item. So I think I made some modifications. I'm just going to double check. So I think I found the solution. So the problem is indeed inside the AC inventory. The problem isn't with the has place or in the pickup item. It's in the is key 4. When we changed the max stack here, I made a little bit of a mistake. Max stack here should be plugged into the minus here. It's subtracting from itself and automatically saying it's negative, meaning it doesn't have any space because of that. So it's automatically adding only 2 new empty slots. So let's try again and see if that fixed the problem. So if we go and craft our iron ingots, and it should add to itself. There we go. So it's working correctly. If we now stop this and click here, it goes back to 0. It has both of those stored. If we press spacebar, now we have 3 items split, and everything seems to be working. As we're crafting, we're getting more items. It's updating on the side here. And I think everything's working as intended. So I think that'll do it for the inventory. It seems to all be working just fine. The sender is updating as well. It's going from 66 to 65, 64. And you're going down by 3 as well. All the items are updated, so yeah, it's working. So I guess thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And well, thank you for sticking around all the way to the end, because this is very, very long. And well, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.